It's ready, folks. Anybody?
I love all your images that you've built of our city.
Thank you.
I've been around it for 50 plus years,
Bless you.
but I was a guest as well at the beginning,
Yeah, good.
so I've seen it. But just wanted to share an experience I have living on the street where I do.
Yeah, please.
Is the place I meet my neighbors most of all
Yeah.
is in the lane when I'm putting out the garbage.
Interesting.
And because we have an excuse for being there
Yeah.
and an ease of talking to each other as we put our garbage in the bins, yeah.
Amazing.
But you go out the front gate
Yeah.
and everybody's getting in their car and driving away.
Exactly.
And it's that kind of, we need an opportunity
Yeah.
to meet our neighbors. We have to create it, and sometimes the lane for me, not a bad place to be.
That's a great story. There's a book I highly recommend. You can get it on Amazon. I'm always looking for Canadian content. It's called the Bees, B-E-E-S, The Bees of Rainbow Falls, by a guy named Preston Puteau. And he's a part-time pastor, part-time beekeeper. And he went to this place called Chestermere, which is about a half an hour east of Calgary. And it's, one of these new cookie cutter subdivision towns. 3 new church plants arrived. It's a new community, so no existing church. All 3 died within a month. Just couldn't get people into church. And he showed up as a beekeeper. And the guy that was building the subdivision said, okay, here's your 3 choices on your front lawn. Do you want this? Do you want that? He said, no, I don't want any of that. I'm going to turn my garden into a place to keep my bees. And the guy's like, whatever. And so he keeps his bees on his front lawn. And it has become, for his street, the gathering place. And he makes free honey and puts it out. And this guy's church is now booming, but it's all through neighborhood connections, and it's all relational, right? So that's a great challenge you've placed all of us. Where do we meet our neighbors? For you, it's the back lane. For Preston, it's beekeeping on his front yard. It's probably illegal here in Vancouver to keep bees. Sorry, Richard, go ahead. Who else has a question?
I was going to follow on Alan's comment about neighbours.
Yeah.
I've lived in a house in Toronto for about 40 years,
Yeah.
and I pretty well would know every single person on my block.
Fantastic.
But a lot of those, we grew up with them, and we had young children together, and the kids were playing on the block.
Yes.
People say kids or dogs
Yeah.
are excuses to meet.
It's true.
One of the things I see here is that you're getting aging communities.
Mm-hmm.
The young people can't move in, and the older people don't socialize in the same way.
Right.
And I think that is a big problem, and it's how do you find some way to link.
Yes.
I'm now in a condo in Vancouver,
Yeah.
and we have really nice people in the building, and I know a lot of them already. We have socials 3 or 4 times a year,
Yeah.
and we get together, and the big problem they're finding is getting the people who don't speak English to come to the socials.
Yes, I can see that.
And the young ones, that's true.
Yeah.
The young ones are too busy because they're taking their kids to activities.
Yeah.
And the Chinese,
Yeah.
and I know some of the Chinese in my building,
Mhm.
but not in the same way that I know the others.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these are the barriers that I would see.
It's really well named, thank you. What we did in our townhouse, North Van, last summer, the district of North Van was giving out these community grants. City of Vancouver probably does the same thing. Micro grants, $500 for whatever. You pitch them a community idea and paid for pizza and a bouncy castle. Man, we met neighbors in our townhouse complex. There's probably about 18 units that we'd never met before. And it was amazing to see people come out, and that was like 4 professional moms, my wife being one of them, who said, this is ridiculous, we need to do something. And so that's a curiosity, who in your building or in your local neighborhood is the kind of person that can gather people, right? To try and bring them together, and then to try and overcome some of those barriers. You mentioned the language barrier. That's a huge challenge, right? A huge challenge for a lot of us. Thank you so much.
Yes, first I wanted to say how much I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
It was just great.
It's great to be here tonight. Thank you.
And I'm not sure if this is an appropriate isn't, don't answer.
now I want to hear the question. I think we all do. That's exciting.
No, you've spoken, and we're in a church, and you've spoken kind of within the Christian context.
Sure.
But couldn't we do this if we were humanitarian?
That's a great question. Yeah. So by this, can I just ask you to do a follow-up statement? What do you mean by this? That would help me know how to answer the question.
It's probably something I'm not sure, but I don't know, but my faith is taking me toward what I think humanitarianism is, rather than what many people think Christianity is, I guess.
Okay, I mean, what I would say to that is, so at the heart of Christianity, we have Trinity, right? So Christians have always spoken of God in terms of 3 in 1, and you think, why is he answering it that way? Here's why. We make an audacious claim as Christians that God is, in God's self, community. That's a unique claim. So God exists in mutual self-giving love, and Christians have always tried to pattern our communities after that. So my question for a church is always, is there evidence that people's lives have been changed in the community, and does it show up in their behavior, right? So when you think, when you speak of humanitarianism, for sure, I think there are non-religious communities that do a far better job of caring for one another than a lot of churches I've seen. We adopted our cat, Rosie the cat, from Vokra. Have you guys heard of Vokra? Amazing organization. Vancouver Orphan Cat, whatever, organization. There are over 250 homes in Vancouver that volunteer to foster stray cats. And when I called this number, a volunteer lady answered, and she could give me the mission, the vision, and the values, just like that, of the organization. And she said, I do this because I got a cat from this organization. And I thought, wow, I wonder how many of us could say that about our own churches, right? There's a guy in California I like very much, Mark Laverton. He's the president of Fuller Seminary. He's a Presbyterian minister. He tells a funny story coming out on Sunday shaking hands, and a guy shakes his hand and says, oh, that was great, thanks, Pastor. He says, look, my life's messed up. I'm just trying to figure it all out. And he said, I'm so confused. He said, I've been going to some churches. And he said, look, I go to some churches, they talk a lot about Jesus, but nothing about the world. And then I go to other churches, they talk all about the world and what's wrong with it, but they never seem to talk about God or Jesus. He said, hey, I've been coming to your church for a couple of weeks, and you seem to talk about both. And Mark writes in his book, he was feeling good at that point. And then the guy said this. He said, Pastor, if I keep coming back to your church, will I meet people like Jesus? And then Mark said he didn't feel so good. He writes, he said, I looked over his shoulder and I thought, I hope this guy doesn't talk to that lady because she's mean, or that guy because he's got crazy conspiracy theories, that kind of thing. What he was doing was he was commenting on the quality of the community, right? And so I think people find community in all kinds of places. I guess my question is, what kind of community do people find here, right? And what could you do to nurture community here? What could people get here that they couldn't get anywhere else in this neighborhood, right? That's a huge challenge. And I think what you find is a lot of my research category for these folks is affable agnostic, right? These are not angry atheists. These are Vancouverites who are delighted that you are Buddhist or Christian or Jewish. That's great. That thing works for you? Amazing. But I'm off to go climb the Chief in Squamish this Sunday, so I hope that's great for you. Like in our townhouse complex, we're literally referred to not as Christians, but we're referred to by our neighbors as the spiritual people, right? Because no one else has any kind of formal faith connection. Some of them have no memory of faith. So I think that's the challenge then for us, is that as Christian communities here in Vancouver, we don't get a bump any longer through inherited Christianity. When I mentioned those churches, those Catholic churches that are growing, they're growing because of immigration, right? They're growing because pre-made Christians are moving to Vancouver and seeking church. In the Presbyterian tradition, we're not getting a lot of Scottish immigrants. And here's the thing, Scotland is as secular now as we are. Even if there was a flood of Scottish immigrants, they're not church going, right? So this is part of the challenge, and that's why mission is so fascinating to me, because how someone and how a community of faith helps people become self-identified as Christian is no longer something the culture does. It's now something that's rightly back in the hands of the church. I think I danced around your question a bit,
No,
but it was a
thank
good
you.
one.
That was
Thank you.
very interesting.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else? What's this sparking for you?
I've appreciated what you've said too. You're right. I mean, I'm in my 80s. I've got 2 sons. Forced them to go to Sunday school.
Yeah.
They don't have any part of it.
Yeah.
And I think, so what is the church? Is the church going to change? I'm not saying water down what we believe in,
Yeah.
but I don't see I could ever encourage my sons or young people to come here.
Right.
They wouldn't, it's like a foreign land.
Yeah. Good. Good.
And they have friends, and none of them have any, except some are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
And I think, well, are they afraid they're going to go to hell? The Catholics are afraid they're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they've got something.
Yeah. I waited with 200 people last night at YVR at 10 o'clock, and there were 0 cabs. So I like to say, I've been to hell. It's at YVR at 10 o'clock at night. I now believe in hell. It's at our airport. That's a great question. Okay, so first of all, what I want to say to you is be kind to yourself. This is the question I hear most often. I love what I do now as a professor. I get to visit churches almost every Sunday in all parts of North America. And your question is a really familiar question, and it's a hard question, because I'm not saying this is for you, but behind the question for some people is, what did I do wrong? My adult kids are not Christian. I brought them to church. And so I just want to say, like, be kind to yourself, be gentle, and cling to the faith that you have, because we don't make other people Christian, right? In the traditional doctrines of the church, conversion is the work of the Holy Spirit. It's what God does. And I have 3 kids at home, and man, God has taught me a lesson that you can't change your kids, right? So when it comes to faith, I think faith is modeled, but when it's caught, it's a God thing, right? I think, so be kind to yourself, number 1. Number 2, I think this is why the question of renewal is important. That the structures that once worked in a culture where people were born nominally Christian are clearly no longer working, right? That the way in which we are trying to communicate the gospel is not finding traction, which I agree with you. That doesn't mean that we change the gospel, we throw out the gospel, but the way in which we communicate it is essential. The example I gave in Richmond, right, of a church that was getting close to closure and is now thriving, it's because they had to literally start a new church in the shell of the old church, right, in order to make that happen. So today, church culture, even a place, I started off by commenting how beautiful this place is. It's because I've been in the church my whole life, right? But this would be an intimidating space for some people, right? And the Church of England, in its mission-shaped church report in the early 2000s, that birthed the Fresh Expressions movement, said that for people who are not used to being in a church, they experience this, almost the same words you used, as an utterly foreign culture, was the language of the report, right? So I think the way we talk about faith is important. And it's hard for us who are already Christian to put into words what it means to communicate the gospel clearly. One of the things I do for the Presbyterian Church is I lead what are called church planter assessments. That is, those who want funding to start new churches, they have to get a yes from the group I'm a part of. And one of the exercises we put them through, I was just doing this in part in Toronto last week, is to ask the question, who is Jesus? And to have them in a group of about 6 potential church planters formulate an answer that someone who has never heard of the gospel, it would make sense to them. And you wouldn't believe how hard it is for people to do that. First group got up and they said, Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And I said, sit down, right? Like, what?